Before we start, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of all the lands on which we are all meeting today. I would also like to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. What I might also do is to just give a quick little intro of Joanne to those in here. Oh, by the way, I'm Andrea, Andrea Marks, because it comes up as TAS meetings when you see that. So, and you hopefully have arrived to come and listen to Joanne Burrows presenting Australian Studio Piano Teachers and its opinions, teaching and teaching practice. Joanne Burrows completed a Bachelor of Arts in Music and Theatre and graduate diploma of teaching. Her studies included composition, piano, voice and recorder. She has taught in the classroom and studio for over 20 years. Joanne completed a Masters of Education through Central Queensland University and in 2021 commenced a Creative Practice PhD that explores composing music for teenage beginners. But rather than listen to me talk about her, I'm going to hand it over to Joanne and she can share her knowledge and experience. Over to you, Joanne.
Thank you, Andrea. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me. And also thank you to the ASME committee for all the hard work that they've done. So this particular paper, Australian Studio Piano Teachers, Opinions, Teaching and Teaching Practice, is authored by myself and co-authored by Professor Judith Brown. This paper presents one part of a larger study that explored constructivism in the materials created for beginner students aged 12 to 17. In 2019, an anonymous survey of 29 questions was completed voluntarily by 239 Australian teachers. The primary function of the survey was to determine the published materials most commonly used by Australian piano teachers with their adolescent beginner students. A second function of the survey, which is the focus of this paper, was to explore the Australian Studio Piano Teachers' teaching practice and investigate their opinions of the published teaching materials and method books created for adolescent beginners. Okay. I don't know why this, here we go. Significant qualitative data accrued from the written responses of participating teachers. The qualitative data, analysed by two forms of content analysis, provides rich descriptions and detailed insights into the facets of the Australian studio piano teachers' perceptions, attitudes and teaching practices. Several themes emerged and were reiterated across the participants' responses. Almost all participants stated that all aspects of musical learning, technique, music reading, aural skills, improvisation, chords, theory, and composition should be taught in equal measure. That relevant, accessible repertoire is of critical importance, particularly in motivating student engagement. Teachers stressed the necessity of tailoring and individualising the teaching content in its sequence and pace of learning. Respondents unanimously agreed that a primary objective of their teaching was to accommodate student learning needs in order to enable each individual to reach their potential. The survey responses demonstrate that the Australian piano teacher has a strong commitment to their teaching and to their student. Ethics was given approval by CQ University's Ethics Committee and a pilot survey completed in October 2018. The survey was administered by SurveyMonkey and open to participants from the 1st of November 2018 to the 28th of February 2019. Piano teachers contacted via several forums were invited to participate in the survey. An invitation for the survey with the request it be forwarded to their piano teacher members was sent to the Art of Piano Pedagogy Facebook page administered by Alyssa Milne, the music teacher associations in each Australian state and territory, the Association of New South Wales Regional Conservatoriums, public websites, tertiary institutions that included music degrees, and the administrator of Music Teachers Online. It is acknowledged that the teachers who are contactable through one of the above agencies may not be represented representative of all piano teachers in the community, but the choice of survey method and the resultant larger sample allowed for a larger, more diverse group than is possible with research methods such as focus groups or interviews. Teachers from every state in Australia were invited to complete the survey. This generated a random sample of participants from the piano teaching cohort. The use of larger samples size aimed to reduce the impact of researcher and participant bias. It is important to acknowledge and minimize the influence of any underlying assumptions held by the researcher. Thus, participation in the survey was anonymous and voluntary. The survey comprised a mix of 21 close-ended and 8 open-ended questions, multiple choice solutions, collecting information regarding each participant's location by state, studio size, studio composition, qualifications, years of teaching, approximate age, and preferred teaching materials for beginner adolescents. SurveyMonkey recorded and calculated these responses into numerical units in the form of percentiles, creating quantitative data, which is discussed in an earlier paper by Browns and Burrows, Studio Piano Teaching in Australia, an exploration of the teaching methods and materials and practices used for older beginners. The 8 open-ended questions, which is the focus of today, offered participants an opportunity to provide comments regarding their preferred piano teaching materials for beginners aged 12 to 17, to describe their personal approach to teaching and identify areas for further research. SurveyMonkey recorded the responses, which were subsequently examined using 2 forms of content analysis. A list of the survey questions is provided in the appendix. Content analysis provides a replicable, reliable process to generate valid inferences, thick description, and rich data. This paper presents the data accrued from 2 forms of content analysis. First, a summative content analysis, which identified, counted, compared repeated words and words of similar meanings, facilitated the identification of themes. A conventional content analysis followed. This required repeated readings of participant responses, which enabled categories, codes, patterns, and themes to emerge from the text. The results of each content analysis was then compared. This facilitated the revelation of common themes, similar responses, repeated statements, key issues, as well as unique and contrasting comments made by the participants. The survey responses revealed several method books commonly used by many teachers when they teach adolescent beginners. This included the Accelerated Piano Adventures for the Older Beginner, Lesson Book 1 by Randall and Nancy Faber, the Alfred's Basic Piano Library, Lesson Book Complete Level 1 for the Later Beginner, and the Older Beginner Piano Course Level 1 by James Bastian. Almost a quarter of the responses used a mix of all 3 of these methods. 2 other method books were frequently mentioned by teachers. They included the Supersonics method created by Queensland composer Daniel McFarland and the Adult Piano Method Book 1 developed by Hal Leonard. In contrast to this, an avoidance of methods books was expressed by a couple of teachers via statements such as, and I quote, anything but a method book. Other comments related to the choice of teaching materials for adolescent beginners were very generalized, and I quote, a wide selection, my own devised materials, my own compositions, internet source materials, pop, jazz, and film music. Specific repertoire titles were not provided, but the majority of responses included statements such as, it depends on the student's interests, use materials they enjoy, choose music relevant to the student's strengths, which indicates that the choice of teaching students' interests and needs. These vaguer responses did create ambiguity in the data. However, for most respondents, respondents, the students' needs and interests guided the teacher's selection of method books and teaching materials. Teaching practice was explored through questions 10 and 11. In question 10, teachers were asked if they used the learning sequence provided by method book or authors' books, page by page in the order provided. Those who sometimes used the learning sequence prescribed by the method book authors, and many who never followed the preset order. It was clear that many teachers skipped pages, changed the order in which they taught the requisite concepts and skills provided by their method books. Question 11 allowed for explanations for the change of sequence of learning from that set or set of teaching materials. These comments included references to student needs, student tastes, student ability, and progress and achievement. Almost half the respondents stated that repertoire choice was a determining factor for changing the order of learning as set out in a published teaching material, with many emphasising the importance of using repertoire the student finds relevant and engaging. Other responses mentioned the addition and inclusion of improvisation and chords as teaching aids to stimulate student motivation. Teachers stated that they altered and adapted the learning sequence sent by method book authors in order to accommodate student needs, tastes, and ability, to acknowledge and use students' prior learning, to suit the student's learning style, to include relevant repertoire, to match the pace of learning set out in the materials with that of the student's ability or indeed frequency of practice, to facilitate progress and achievement, and coordinate student progress with suitable materials. And finally, to reinforce skills or accelerate student progress. In summary, teachers tended to use their selected teaching materials in ways that would motivate the student, meet the student's needs, connect learning with the student's interests, and a deep desire to enable the student to progress and achieve positive outcomes. In question 12, teachers were asked if they used more than one method book or parts of a method book with a single student. Almost half the respondents indicated that they sometimes used more than one book, and the remainder was split between those who never used the book, more than one book with a beginning student, and those who always used more than one book with a beginning student. A very small number of participants did not use method books, or they created original works for their beginning students. Question 13 therefore explored teachers' reasons for the use of multiple method books with a single beginner student. Many participants made vague statements that concerned the student's interest and motivation, and I quote, relevant, appealing repertoire to give variety, to maintain interest, or to prevent monotony. Respondents also made generalised statements related to pedagogy, for example, meeting the needs of the students, accommodating student interests and goals, tailoring the lesson for the respective student. It depends on how quickly the student picks up different things or to fill in gaps. These statements quoted from participant answers were not explained, but there was consistent reiteration from most respondents that they selected and used multiple method books and teaching materials in order to stimulate and maintain student motivation and progress. Thus, the use of multiple beginner books and added materials with any individual student was governed by a desire to help students learn and progress. In question 15, teachers were asked to explain their rationale for the choice of method books and teaching materials. Almost every response alluded to an aspect of pedagogy, most specifically the importance of customizing and tailoring the teaching program to suit the student's individual needs. Age and stage appropriate materials, student learning styles, and the facilitation of student progress were also cited as important. Repertoire choice rated a significant consideration when choosing teaching materials. and the comment variety and variety of repertoire was mentioned without explanation or elaboration by many. Respondents indicated that their choice of material was based on student taste, student preference, and student interests. So repertoire choice was also key to encouraging and maintaining student engagement, central in facilitating motivation and practice, essential for the realization of successful outcomes and the achievement of student goals. Overall, participant responses revealed that their choice and use of teaching materials and method books is influenced by a deep commitment to find and use materials that most effectively stimulate student learning. In question 16, teachers were asked to explain what they perceived to be the strengths of method books and materials which they used with their adolescent beginners. A range of responses from one word, general comments, specific observations, and detailed descriptions were made. Positive features of the teaching materials related to 4 key areas: pedagogy, repertoire, teaching content, and visual presentation. A number of general adjectives such as good, fun, varied, interesting were included in the positive remarks related to repertoire selections that were within each teacher preferred learning materials. Several participants mentioned as strengths the inclusion by some method books of jazz, pop, and contemporary music, but at the same time requesting additional pieces in these genres. A very small number expressed favourable comments regarding the inclusion of classical repertoire. Although a large percentage of comments around repertoire choice tended to be vague, teacher statements were predominantly student-centric, with most indicating that repertoire selection was guided by its relevance to student interests, its motivational potential, and its contribution towards student progress. Aspects of the pedagogical approach that used by their chosen method book or the teaching materials were considered a strength. These included logical and suitable and well-structured comments, and others which considered the pace at which their preferred teaching materials introduced skills and knowledge. Several participants found the sequencing of new concepts and foundation skills provided by their chosen teaching materials appropriate. A small proportion observed that the language used to explain musical concepts and skills was appropriate and easy to read. Other positive observations regarding the content of teacher-preferred method books include the inclusion of simple improvisation tasks and incorporation of aural and theory. A caveat that method books should include a greater number of activities to develop aural and improvisation skills, however, was frequently added. Some respondents mentioned that the approach to music reading was suitable in their chosen materials. Others preferred the way theory was integrated. The inclusion by method book authors of backing tracks in the form of audio files or online video clips were considered a strength. A small number of teachers indicated that they found the content and presentation of method books and published materials too narrow and boring. The visual presentation of method books and teaching materials created for adolescent beginners attracted a mix of comments. Larger note size, clear text, and the occasional illustration or well-designed diagram and less cluttered pages were considered by respondents as positives. Some comments were made by participants that they did not use method books, that they wrote their own or sourced alternative materials from the internet. Weaknesses of preferred teaching materials were explored in question 17, and teachers were invited to articulate their perceptions of what was lacking in various method books and materials for teenage beginners. A very small portion of respondents stated that they were satisfied with the materials they used. The majority of participants referred to 3 key issues in the method books and materials they currently used with their adolescents: repertoire, content, and pedagogy. A small percentage of teachers wrote their own materials, and 1 or 2 were extremely negative about all published materials. Participant comments highlighted the restricted repertoire choices provided in most method books, and the need to match choice of repertoire to student interest and musical preference was reiterated. The frequent inclusion of nursery rhymes and little-known folk or traditional tunes in most beginner methods was criticised and considered alienating for beginners aged 12 to 17. Comments regarding the dearth of songs that students liked, list of modern and contemporary pieces accessible to the beginner, and a desire for a greater quantity of repertoire that interests and engages students permeated the bulk of the responses. Participants stated there was not enough relevant repertoire that matched the teenage group with their skill level. Few respondents mentioned the absence of Australian content. The data, however, strongly indicated that selecting suitable repertoire is of foremost importance to teachers of beginners aged 12 to 17. In terms of method book content, teachers' responses highlighted the paucity of oral tasks, the overuse of reading music as a means to learn to play the piano, the scarcity of easily suitable lead sheets, and the lack of creative exercises and need to include a greater number of inspirational activities. The majority of teachers indicated that the areas of aural, lead sheet, chords, improvisation, and creative music making were not adequately represented in the currently published materials. Participant responses also revealed perceived inadequacies in the pedagogy of their preferred materials. Some described the transitions from new skill to new skill within their preferred method books as poorly structured, and some deemed the pace too slow, others too fast. In summary, descriptions of the weaknesses of current beginner methods and teaching materials revealed an ongoing concern related to accessing relevant, suitable repertoire which motivates student engagement, a clearly voiced demand for the inclusion of greater number of tasks and activities that develop aural, improvisation, and creative music making skills, and the importance of accommodating the individual's learning needs to ensure their progress and success. In question 18, teacher practice was explored. This question produced a very mixed response from participants, which included single word answers, a short statement without clarification, a list of suggestions of what they would like or what would be useful without any recounting of their teaching activities and strategies. Despite the wide assortment of answers, participant responses reiterated the importance of repertoire, content, and pedagogy. Repertoire was recapitulated as a significant consideration for teachers, the majority of responses centering around allowing the student to choose and play pieces they like or want to learn. Responses restated the importance of relevant and interesting pieces, the need for additional beginner level pop jazz style repertoire, and a search for relatable classical music was also noted by a small group. However, the lack of songs with which students were familiar was mentioned frequently. The content of the teaching materials and method books was mentioned in relation to a need to include more extensively aural-based activities, playing by ear, chord playing, lead sheets, improvisation, and composition, and to among approximately a third of the responses referred to pedagogical outcomes and stressed that teaching methods needed to inspire engagement and facilitate student progress. In summary, the strengths, weaknesses, opinions, and perspectives of Australian teachers can be summarised as the following. By comparing the responses to their questions, areas of consistent concern regarding the teaching materials and method books used with adolescent beginners revolved around those three key areas. In all three questions, comments about repertoire choice rated the highest response, and an imperative to include many more examples of jazz, pop, contemporary style repertoire was cited frequently across all three questions. Statements related to the content of teaching materials and method books was reiterated, and participants communicated the requisite that teaching materials and method books feature larger quantities of tasks that involve chords, provide greater variety and numbers of improvisational opportunities, that they include a wide range of lead sheets and chord playing, incorporate the development of aural skills more consistently, and offer a larger range of compositional activities. Responses related to facets of pedagogy were similarly reflected across the answers to questions 16, 17, and 18. Observations disclosed a range of personal issues with the pace and sequence sent by many method books, and participants recapitulated the need to adapt, modify, add, subtract, and rearrange various learning tasks from that which is set out in published materials. The final survey question invited teachers to post any other comments related to teaching adolescent beginners or teaching in general. Teacher remarks replicated the following points. Teaching content should include a more even mix of technique, music reading, aural skills, improvisation, chords, theory, technique, composition than that which is currently in existence in the available teaching materials for beginner piano students aged 12 to 17. Repertoire choice is of crucial significance, and there is an ongoing need for an additional relevant and appealing pieces accessible to the adolescent beginner pianist. Tailoring the learning content, its pace and sequence to meet the needs of each student is highly valued by the participants, and accommodating the students' needs emerged as a central goal at the core of their teaching role. Teachers expressed a strong desire to enable each of their students to reach his or her potential. In other responses to question 29, the challenges of teaching teenage beginners was discussed. Some drew attention to the disconnect between the older beginners' physical skill, which often lagged behind their understanding. A smaller number commented on the difficulty of where to start adolescent beginners, and a significant proportion of teachers observed that teen beginners learn differently compared to young beginners. Time issues with adolescent beginners who may be working, engaged in sport, other curricular activities was highlighted, and several teachers admitted they found teens harder to motivate and keep interested. Responses also mentioned the need for more training for studio teachers at university and tertiary levels, and others mentioned students with learning disabilities. The participants' comments highlighted the need for continued research in all areas of piano pedagogy and studio piano teaching in Australia. This paper discussed the qualitative data generated from a bifold content analysis of the responses made by 239 Australian studio piano teachers to 8 open-ended questions. The term pedagogy was rarely mentioned by participants, but its importance was demonstrated through respondents' frequent comments, which related to the desire to facilitate student progress and engagement, a persistent interest in accommodating individual learning styles. Also, participants described their willingness to alter the sequence of learning of core concepts and skills, to adapt the pace of learning and search for new repertoire and lead sheets, to modify the content of published materials and method books, or even use several method books simultaneously in order to meet student learning needs. Thus, the student as centre of the learning process emerged as a consistent theme. Repertoire choice, its relevance to the student, and its motivational role was a persistent comment amongst all participants. The majority of respondents indicated that requisite knowledge, concepts and skills that form the current method books was adequate in some areas, but deficient in several core aspects. These included the limited variety, style and quantities of beginner repertoire, the almost non-existent inclusion of lead sheets and chord playing, the overuse of music reading approaches, and infrequent inclusion of aural and improvisational activities. Other literature. Some of the literature related to studio piano teaching and piano pedagogy is confirmed by this data. For example, Chemaraska identified that the use of teaching approaches and materials which did not accommodate student learning needs were major contributors to the cessation of lessons. The importance of student-centric learning and the use of teaching approaches which accommodate student learning needs was highlighted in his research. Research by Hsieh determined that a single method book used alone did not adequately meet the students' needs. And the overuse of music reading as an approach to learning piano skills, with the infrequent inclusion of creative improvisation and aural approaches, resonates with research conducted by Priya, Faber, and Monroe. Survey participant complaints regarding the overuse of music reading approaches and infrequent inclusion of creative improvisational and aural approaches. I've said that already. The relevance of musical repertoire as key to student motivation and the repeated requests by respondents for greater quantities of pop, jazz and film music repertoire is voiced in research related to piano studio teaching, including that of Bowden, Chemaraska, Weber, Hsieh and Monroe.
Joanne, we're just over time, so we will have to wind it up.
No worries.
Yep. Thank you for that. What I would suggest,
that's it, just leave there?
Well, is there anything else just to finish? I was going to then suggest that people, rather than chat now, is they can email you directly, and that might be helpful. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's the summary of what the characteristics of a Australian piano teacher. And that's the overriding character. And that's all I have.
Thanks so much. It's interesting because certainly it's nice to see that people are committed to teaching their students and wanting the best for them. So that's a really lovely element of it. Folks, if you have got some questions, can I suggest if you go via the website, there's an email link to Joanne and you can put some questions to her if you'd like to. We're sorry it was a really tight fit for this one today, but hopefully you can go away and have a break, have a bite to eat, and join us again later.
Yeah. Every time I practiced it, I was under time, so I don't know.
Probably my introduction. So yeah, take care, everyone.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you for coming, everyone, and I hope you found it useful.